Hello, and welcome to another episode of Whispers in the Dark, a weekly horror anthology series featuring short stories written, performed, and edited by yours truly, Jerence George. Today's episode is about a security guard who goes by the name of Thomas. Well, Thomas decides it's a good idea to pick up an extra shift for some extra spending money. But what he doesn't know about this particular post is that he is about to enter a realm beyond imagination. The title of today's story is There's Something Wrong with That Building.
My name is Thomas Hughes. For the past 5 years, I've been working as a security guard, tasked with watching over various locations around town. Construction sites, office buildings, shopping centers. I have parked my ass in front of all of them and spent entire nights watching absolutely nothing happen. It's thankless, boring ass work, but it pays the bills. Plus, there's no boss breathing down my neck. As a matter of fact, on my first day, my boss let me know over the phone that he never ever came to overnight sites, and if there was an emergency, I should just call 911. By the time I got to questioning why he was so adamant, he had already hung up. In the 5 years on this shift, I had never seen anything out of the ordinary. Of course, that was before the assignment on 9200 South Grove Avenue. It was my day off, and I was going to spend the evening hanging with my girlfriend when my boss called, sounding frantic and talking fast about someone not showing up for their shift. He said we really needed the account, and he'd pay me double time for the shift. Well, only a fool would turn down double time for easy work, so I agreed to cover for the guy who flaked. My boss cut me off by saying, "Great," and hung up before I could even finish my sentence. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting an eerie glow over the desolate streets, the building on 9200 South Grove wasn't one of those fancy downtown high-rises. It loomed before me, a silent sentinel, hiding secrets within its walls. It was a brown and white, 5-floor office building that looked straight out of the 70s. Looking at it from my car, I wondered why my boss was so concerned about the account in the first place. I know this sounds silly, but I swear to you, after a moment of staring up at that building, I could feel the weight of its history settling on my shoulders. The air smelled as if it were charged with electricity. While approaching the front door of the building, I couldn't see anything through its tinted windows, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Convinced that it was my imagination, I shook off the childish fear and pressed forward. I inserted the key I was left in the door, turned it, and it creaked open. As I slowly stepped inside the dark, shadow-drenched building, it was as if I'd stepped into a realm trapped between the present and a forgotten past. I flicked on the lights, illuminating the long, shadow-drenched corridors. The air was thick, so thick, as if carrying the whispers of forgotten lives. But it was the silence that unsettled me the most, the void that seemed to absorb all sound, leaving me alone with my thoughts and growing unease. My footsteps echoed through the empty hallways as I began my patrol. The building appeared abandoned, devoid of the usual signs of life. But as I walked, the chilling realization crept over me. Objects shifted in my wake. Papers flooded on the desks. Chairs swiveled in my peripheral vision. And shadows whispered secrets I couldn't comprehend. Determined to dismiss the growing sense of dread as an overactive imagination and a pre-work joint, I pushed forward. Yet, as the night wore on, the building's true nature revealed itself. a malevolence that twisted reality and played tricks on my mind. Whispers, barely audible at first, drifted through the air, the fragmented echoes of tormented souls. I strained to decipher their word fragments of what seemed like people pleading to some unseen tormentor. I convinced myself that the volume of the whispers was low enough to dismiss as another flight of imagination. Per company policy, I had to walk the whole of the building at least 3 times during my shift. With each step, paranoia tightened its grip on me. When I completed my first round and returned to the area I had begun, what was once a familiar office space transformed into a nightmarish maze, shifting and warping as if guided by an unseen force. The room swirled. I closed my eyes and leaned back onto the nearest wall I could find with my eyes closed tight. I could have sworn I heard the echoes of someone's laughter. When I forced my eyes back open, the desks had moved. They had been rearranged to form a circle. It was there that I encountered a presence. A figure was on all fours on the floor, draped in a dark sheet that spread out about 15 feet around. It appeared that there was a person underneath the sheet, but the body was very thin and wiry. There was something wrong about the way the person breathed underneath the sheet. No, not breathed, gasped. Its arched back heaved up and down, and a wet, choking sound escaped from the person's head. The covered head then rose and turned to face me. I knew nothing about this thing, but I could tell with all of my heart that it hated me. The thing under the sheet then rose and stood in full. It was taller than I thought, too tall. It must have been at least 10 feet tall. Its breathing quickened. The wet gasps increased and became more rapid as the seconds passed. Its shoulders lurched forward with each struggling breath. The person now turned its entire body towards me. My heart pounded in my chest as I slowly stepped backwards, desperate to escape the gaze that seemed to consume me. I fumbled for my radio, hoping to reach out for help, but the device crackled with static, mocking my futile attempts to break the building's suffocating grasp. Panic surged through me like a tidal wave, urging me to flee. I let out a scream when I backed into a wastebasket and stumbled backwards, letting that person out of my sight. I screamed and flailed while trying my best not to burst into panic tears as I clumsily regained my footing. I snapped my head around to the circle of desks where I saw the thing underneath the sheet, and it was gone. The desk still formed a circle, but the center was empty. I then decided that I didn't need the overtime so much after all. I took a step to the exit when the world turned black. Before my eyes could register what happened, I felt the smooth, soft sensation of a sheet on the side of my face. That's why the world went black. Something, had tossed a black sheet over my head. I let out a primal scream and began to run in the direction I was pointed in. Even though the sheet covered me completely, it didn't cling to me. It spread out away from me a bit, as if someone were holding it from the other side and stretching it out. My suspicion was confirmed when I heard giggling on the other side of the sheet. On instinct, I backed away from the sound. I wish I hadn't trusted my instincts. After taking a step backwards, I bumped into something. My body locked in place when it registered that what I had bumped into felt like a thin, skeletal, naked body. A long-fingered, pale, sickly hand lowered itself on my left shoulder and I felt movement on my right side. A sore-infested, bloody-mouthed face lowered itself to mine. Its hot, rancid breath blew into my face. From a mouth that formed an impossible circular shape, the wet breathing sound I had heard before came from the circular mouth. And that was followed by blood-red balls of saliva that bubbled from the terrible opening in its face. Without thinking, I ran forward as hard as I could. The sheet continued to stretch out the further I ran, and the giggling continued. I could hear the thing breathing a step behind as I pushed forward. I ran down the building's corridors until they turned into a twisted labyrinth that turned on itself. The walls closed in, pulsating with a darkness that seemed to hunger for my sanity. With every grasp for breath, I sprinted towards the exit, my mind and body consumed by terror. But as I reached the threshold of the room that I was in before, I saw the figure, standing there like he once was. Too tall and covered in a black shroud. This time, its arms stretched out towards me like a loving parent pleading for a hug from their child. Needless to say, that direction was out of the question. In my desperation, I turned to the depths of the building, hoping to find an alternative path, maybe through the parking garage. The stairwell beckoned, its depth shrouded in an impenetrable darkness. I descended, my footfalls echoing through the winding steps, each one taking me further into the heart of the building's darkness. The air grew frigid. Frosty tendrils caressed my skin. Whispers began to fill the space, a chorus of tormented souls yearning for release. They knew my name. They called out to me. They pleaded with me. Every now and again, my flashlight would catch shadows writhing on the walls, their sinuous forms mocking my futile attempts to escape their clutches. When I reached what was supposed to be the parking garage, I instead stumbled upon a small space with a forgotten room, its door ajar, revealing a scene that defied reason. In the room's center stood a statue, a twisted embodiment of agony and despair. Its eyes were hollow sockets of polished white stone. They seemed to glare into the depths of my very being. I almost cried when the statue smiled at me and took a step off of its pedestal. I somehow found a strength I've never known and pumped my legs as hard as I could up the flight of stairs to the main floor. I didn't dare look back, but I heard the heavy thone of stone legs hitting the steps just after I did. Dread enveloped me. I ran, propelled by my primal instinct to survive. The whispers grew louder, their words crawling beneath my skin, infecting my thoughts with their sinister intent. With the terrible smiling statue on my heel, I found the courage to run through the main entrance, past the too tall covered man, and bursting through the front doors. I gasped for breath as the bright morning sun assaulted my eyes. That was impossible. I entered the building when my shift started, and I couldn't have been inside for more than an hour. The time on my phone and the sun on my face said otherwise. A sudden loudness on my ringtone snapped me from my confusion. My boss's number came up on the screen. I was actually glad that he called because I obviously had some words of my own for him. Unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to give him the tongue lashing he deserved. He was too busy screaming at me for flaking and not showing up at the address he texted. I was too confused to even be angry at the tone he used. The events of the past hour were too fresh in my mind. Desperately searching for answers, I lowered my phone and turned back to the building with his angry voice still emanating from my device. What was the point of all this? If some malevolent spirit wanted to do me harm, then why release me? Was their goal more sinister? Did they only want to put me through all this to loosen my grip on sanity? It didn't take long for me to receive my answer. My cell phone slipped from my grip and hit the ground when I stood in front of the place I had just spent my worst nightmare and saw nothing but an empty, vacant lot.
Now, before we get ready to judge Tommy for staying in that building for longer than he should have, maybe we should consider our own lives. Do you have enough character to walk away from something that feels wrong, even if the price is right? If you enjoyed today's episode, don't hesitate to give it a share or a like and/or review on your favorite listening platform. Thanks again for joining us, and remember, the next time you're alone in the dark, listen carefully, and you might just hear whispers.